Welcome everyone to the first ever Idea Festival. My name is Celine Fabrequette and today I will be your moderator. And yes, I am French. On this virtual stage, together with my amazing panelists, we will not only ask why you should care about racism, discrimination, and diversity. That will be way too easy. We'll also tell you what you can do to whether you are an individual, an institution, a politician, an organization, an independent, a company, a friend, or part of a community. We will try to provide a little bit of answer for everyone. But just so you know, you can ask your question directly. So then you can also get your answer. There's no stupid questions. We are here to help. But let us start by all recognizing that there is an institutional racism in Europe, and that Black Lives Matter. Without further blah from me, let me introduce you to MEP Alice Barkunko, this chair of the Green and former Minister for Culture and Democracy of Sweden. She is a strong and vocal advocate when it comes to women's rights and equality. Bonjour Alice! We will also be accompanied by Karen Taylor of the European Network Against Racism, ENAR, and she's also Director of Policy and Advocacy at Each One Teach One, a Black-led community. Karen has been attacking racism in Germany pretty much from all angles. Can it be done? Thank you very much, Karen. Bonjour, Karen. Talking about racial discrimination cannot be done without the business. So I'm very happy to present Gurpreet, Edelman, Brussels General Manager. In Brussels since 2014, he is leading Edelman consultants in Brussels on sector and issue which include litigation, financial service, energy, health, tech, and food. Bonjour, Gurpreet. And last but not least, Shada Islam has been fighting and pushing for the Brussels bubble to wake up, trying in each of her position to create spaces for people of color. She's well respected and one of the most influential persons in Brussels, and she uses her power for good. Bonjour Shada, bonjour mes panélistes. So, what happened to George Floyd ignited a fire worldwide, especially within the European Union. People started marching and denouncing the structural and institutional racism that's happening in EU. So my first question, let's start with Alice. Maybe you can give us a bit of a set of the scene. What is your motivation? What should people care? In your position as representative of the people elected from Sweden, why did you started to care about this, and how the George Floyd situation has changed the work that you're doing currently in the European Parliament?
Thank you, Celine. Mr. Floyd wasn't, as we all know, the first one that was killed of police brutality. There have been several killings for decades, or for hundreds of years. But I think that there were so many things piling up so that when this killing happened, we were so many, and due to the fact that we have social media, that really felt that we must act now, because we can't stand another Black person being killed because of the color of the skin, or the fact that that's the basic ground for the killings. So we need to appoint or to show the structural racism within the US. But for me as an MEP and as a politician from Europe and from Sweden, it was also important to make sure that the public awareness when it comes to structural racism in the world is also a fact, and is also a huge problem within Europe, within the EU and in Sweden. So being a minister for democracy and being a minister with a responsibility when it comes to putting the light on racism and discrimination in Sweden, I know that the voters that voted for me also wanted me to take this fight within the whole of the EU. So it was, I mean, an ongoing process that really just by this awful killing got more fire and more anger. So when I had this idea that we should raise this question and put a resolution in place within the parliament, I first took it to the bureau in the Greens, and we took it to the other groups. And then I found out during these days when I had so many talks with other politicians from the other groups, from the Conservatives to the Socialists to the left, I talked with so many white men within this parliament. And I found out that they are there also. I mean, it's not an easy question saying it's only the Greens and the left who really wants to fight this. There are persons within the EPP that also want to fight racism and discrimination. And I found them, and I really filled them with all the arguments, and then went back to their friends saying, we must put this resolution in place. And then we voted. And the resolution, I mean, gathered a huge majority. I mean, and the resolution is really, if you haven't read it, read it, because it's not only putting the light and saying what's wrong with the US and the structural racism there. It also says, and this is the most important for us, that we have a problem and we need to do more within the EU. I mean, and the outcome has been several outcomes. I've been in so many discussions around in the EU and in Sweden. And some days ago, President von der Leyen called me and said that she wanted a meeting with me as a consequence of this resolution and what we did. So I had a meeting with her where we talked about fighting racism and discrimination, and she asked very upfront, what shall we do and how should we do it? And I also felt that she is engaged, being a conservative from CDU, having most of her friends in the EPP, me and my group not even voting for her. She saw that we need to have a common ground when we need to fight racism. So, I mean, we really need to be engaged in this. This is such an opportunity for us now, due to the sad fact that the killings has been going on for so long. We now have the chance to really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Karen. I'm going to ask you about you. Like, why should people care? Like, why? And the question is, why people are caring now? I mean, ENAR, you guys have been fighting that fight for a while at EU level. So what do you think changed into the mentality of the institution? And why should we not just be like, okay, now we cared, it was in the media. Is it just the media? Was it the people on the street? What do you think made this little push? Because it's been a while since you guys have been really fighting for this.
Thank you also for the invitation and this question, Celine. I mean, it's sad to say, but Alice already mentioned it. George Floyd's killing has somehow been a door opener and an eye-opener to the European societies. It's always easier to finger point at different countries, different continents even, and say, well, they have a problem with racism and we don't. So I think at the beginning, that was the motivation of this movement. And very quickly, the Black Lives Matter movement in different parts of Europe, but also the solidarity movement outside of the Black communities, were really fast to say, no, this is a global problem. It is a structural problem that we face in Europe as well. And we can't only talk about racism in the US, but we need to face and tackle the structural issues we have here. So I believe it was kind of a spillover from that anger and protest that came over from the US, and where it was easy to say and to agree, well, that was bad. And then organizations, civil society activists taking the street and saying, okay, look, we need to face the problem we have here too. Then, of course, we were in the middle of and still are in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, which also highlighted the vulnerabilities of our communities. So we had these two dynamics going on. And at the end, this movement on the street was so big that policymakers around Europe couldn't ignore that anymore. They had to face it, and they had to say something. I'm not saying that the reactions were the ones that we were hoping for. I have to be honest here. I'm based in Berlin, in Germany. We have, for the moment, ongoing the discussion around a cabinet office which will face racism for the very first time on a national level, and not only right-wing extremism linked to the German past. There is a very strong stand against right-wing extremism, but a very high barrier to talk about racism. So we do see that, and of course, also on Brussels level, we do see that this talks about the action plan against racism are ongoing, that civil societies have been contacted as well, but they've only been contacted, and I do repeat that, we only are been contacted kind of put out the fire, yeah? So we are called as kind of the firefighters against racism, but that's not enough. As we know, it's a it's a structure problem. We need to be in the loop. We need to be part of the discussions all the time, and not just after a killing. And another thing is when we do talk about racism and why should we care, that was your question, why should we care? Because at the end, it does kill our communities, and it does kill our communities in Europe as well. People just deny the fact, we have ministers denying the fact that police violence exists. We have the part of the European Commission denying that even structural racism exists. So I believe it's not only a question for our communities, but also for the whole majority of Europe.
Thank you so much, Karen, for this great introduction and onto why should we care. And I'm gonna go to Gurpreet now and ask you, Gurpreet, why it's still in the why should we care, but now I would like you to give us a bit of a understanding of, you know, what just Karen said about the fact that it's also a majority problem. Because for me, I understand that we as a community won't be able to change much if the majority doesn't come in. So how do we get the majority to care? And because we hear a lot, this is why I wanted to say Black Lives Matter, because we hear a lot, oh yeah, but all lives matter. So how should we go about this with the majority, to have a conversation with the majority so then they also get on board?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be here. And what a historic moment in many regards that we're having this panel and this discussion at all, and we should celebrate that in the first instance. I think you know, Alice referenced a number of different points that I think are very important, and Karen, I completely agree with many of the points that you made, but I want to take a step back to take a step forward almost. For me, this makes sense. People should care on a very basic human level. At the end of the day, this is a human conversation. We should not forget that. There are a silent minority in this region that actually look like us, and they don't look like the majority. And they may not have had their grandparents were born here, or their parents were born here, or their great ancestors may not have been born here, but they live here and they exist here and they have a reason to operate here. And we need to make sure that they feel part of the conversation, and they need to feel part of the discussion as well. And so just on a very basic level, at a human level, it is important that every single one of us should care. And I think that's simply outlined. Secondly, you know, you outlined, Celine, when you started, you know, we obviously at Edelman do a lot of business, and we work with a number of different clients. On a business level, this matters as well. You know, creativity comes from when you bring different people from different backgrounds together, not when you have the same people sat in a room that have the same upbringing and look the same, and you put them in a room and you ask them to come up with something innovative. That's not what how creativity happens. So it is important that on a business level, we recognize we need to have diversity and inclusion, and report after report proves diversity yearns better results. You don't have to look at our study. We publish the Trust Barometer every single year. We look at this issue, but look at PwC's reports, look at a whole raft of different pieces of literature that are out there that make this point time and time again, that diversity actually yields better outcomes. And so it matters on a business level, and that's why people should care. Third, I don't think Europe can claim the moral or the ethical high ground on climate issues or on the big issues such as data and technology and how we want to regulate the world, and ignore this one. How can you let this be somebody else's issue and claim that on the others we are morally or ethically better? I don't need that argument. And so I find it very hard to digest that Europe wants to say we want to own sustainability and we want to have clarity on regulation. We want to own regulation around the technology and the future that's coming, but we don't want to have a strong POV and strong action in this debate. I personally don't think that makes sense for me. And then finally, there is a historic reason. There is a historic reason why people in this continent should care. So, there are, and we may not have enough time to go into all of the reasons and rationales around the history, but people should care, firstly, on a human level, secondly, from a business imperative level, third, because there is a moral and ethical reason for Europeans to care, and then finally, for me, it is very, very important that we do care from a historic perspective as well. On allyship, I think Shada and I, just before we joined, we were talking about Ryan Heath. He tried to have this conversation many years ago when, to the points that you were raising, it wasn't cool to talk about diversity in Brussels and nobody wanted to have this debate. And I'm delighted that he tried to have that conversation, but we weren't being listened to. So I agree with Karen and Alice. We have an opportunity to really make sure we are not only having a discussion, we are driving action. And action, we should judge our representatives on, not on words. I think Karen made the very important point that we've had words for many years, but very little has changed in the Brussels bubble as a result of words. I'm looking forward to seeing what the Commission puts out, and I'm looking forward to seeing what very specific actions are going to come out of this conversation, because words don't work for me anymore.
Thank you so much, Gurpreet, for your intervention and very clear of why we should care. And now I would like Shada to come in, and with her experience within the Brussels bubble, with your experience with the media, maybe Shada, you can a bit enlighten us, because I think it was as Gurpreet talked about Ryan Heath, and the first time I think it really came, this whole Brussels to white, it was about 2 years ago. And since then, I think, Shada, you've been writing a lot of articles in different media, you've been, providing insight. And so can you maybe let us know, why should the media care? Because to be honest, they are very influential into how every citizen, or even influential into the politician direction they are taking. So why should they care? Shada.
Thank you very much, Celine. And like Gurpreet, I'd like to say congratulations to OPP for organizing this very important event. It's very, very interesting that we're starting off a new autumn season, policy season in Brussels with this debate. And I was afraid with the summer break that somehow the momentum we've built up over this issue of Black Lives Matter in Europe as well would die down. But now it's reassuring that it isn't, and we're waiting for this action plan. Now, you mentioned Ryan Heath, and of course that was a very important moment. But remember, Gurpreet, if a brown journalist that I've been writing about this for many, many years, but it took Politico, a mainstream newspaper, and Ryan, a wonderful person, a white man as well, to actually bring it into the mainstream. And I'm very grateful for that. But the fact remains that questions that come from ethnic minority journalists, whether it's in the Brussels press corps, in the room itself or outside, are not listened to, are not responded to in the same fashion. I've been talking about it for many, many years, in fact, decades, and coming up with a rather, I would say, shrug off kind of an attitude saying, well, this is a disruptive question. Diversity in Europe is about nationalities, the regions, our languages. Why are you bringing this uncomfortable, unnecessary question of race into this context? And I can tell you, many, many people have said that to me, but I persisted. And I think it's very important. You asked me why we should care. We should care because we're Europeans, full-fledged Europeans, committed, in my case and in all your cases, passionately to the European project. When we see that representation of such an important ethnic minority, 10% of our population, according to data, it's not complete data, is of that are people of color. Black, brown Europeans, and our voices are not represented, or very, very marginally so. That leads, Celine, to flawed policies, whether it's foreign policy, security policy, trade policy, development policy. If we do not have a diversity of opinions, of experiences to bring to the European table, the policies are just one-dimensional, they're partial. And I can give you examples of this, I won't now, but that is the case. So why should we care? We should care because we believe in a Europe that is really diverse. We should celebrate diversity.
Please, Shada, do give us an example of policy that is flawless because it lacks diversity and it lacks the consulting people of color. Please give us an example because I want the viewer to understand really what we're talking about, not just saying the words, but also giving them proper examples. So please do. Thank you.
Okay, I will. So if you take European development policy, and now we're in the process of crafting a new policy for Africa. It's being done in Brussels or with delegations, European delegations in African countries. Where are the African voices of African Europeans, people like you, Celine, who have a personal experience, who've actually got ancestors, connections, historical, cultural, personal connections? You can bring such an important voice to this conversation. People do not understand that, Gurpreet mentioned it, one-dimensional policies lead to groupthink, and groupthink is what is destroying us. So if you're having a conversation on Afghanistan, let's say, or Cambodia, Myanmar, Asia, Africa, you do need to hear the voices, not just of diplomats. They're actually bringing the voice of their countries and their governments, but people like you and me, we have an understanding of issues that others do not, because we have lived it. Our ancestors, our parents have lived it. We know the complexities. Life is not black and white. There's a lot of gray there, a lot of nuances, a multifaceted world. And to get that kind of sophisticated assessment of what's happening in the world outside Europe, you need to have diversity of people and experiences, talents, skills, and knowledge. And that, I think, is what is desperately needed in European policies. You can see that that does happen elsewhere. It doesn't always lead to perfection because we're not perfect people, but it does help to get a more realistic understanding of what the rest of the world, the outside world, is all about. As a think tanker, I've always believed it very, very important to listen to all experiences and all different types of let's say, talent and knowledge that's out there. If we're not doing it at a higher level, lower level, grassroots level, we're really not fully exploiting the potential of European power on the world stage.
Thank you, Shada. I see Alice, she's like really excited and she wanted to come in already with
I mean, yes, but can I?
Climate. So please tell us about climate because I know you've got, like, I see you.
Well, you are saying, as all of you, Karen, Shada, you are saying so many interesting things. So I wish we had hours to talk, but we have years to work together when it comes to this. I don't need to say everything now, but just to say something about what Shada just said about the consequences of not knowing what competencies you need to make a real change. And that's why one of the consequences of racism is discrimination. And that's why we need to work with the tools that we have. As politician, as a lawmaker, I'm of course looking at the laws and what structures can be changed by the laws. But then we also need to work with knowledge and changing people's mind and of course sharing power. But discrimination is such a huge problem. And we also know that discrimination against Black people, people of color, but also people with different disabilities and LGBTI persons and so on and so forth, are a huge problem within the EU. And still there are people telling me in discussions, no, we don't discriminate, we look at competences. No, you're looking at competences within this area, not competences, as Shada just said, competences sitting down at the table and saying, to really change our relationship with this country, what competences do we need to have around the table? And this is I get so upset every time I think about this, because this is a huge problem with all of these men, because it's often men, sitting around the table thinking that they know everything. And we must tell them, you don't know everything. Sometimes you don't know anything. I'll get so upset, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Well, we've got a question, so now it's a bit of a Q&A, so Duan Wright, technical consultant, she says, does everyone agrees that across the EU that some countries are more advanced than others in terms of race relations, and people of BAM, so BAM is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, background fare better in some countries than others? So the good thing is we do have diversity today, because I am French, there's Sweden, UK, Shada, you are from
and Belgium,
and Karen, she is in Germany right now. So so I believe we can go a little bit around, and each of us can tell like what's the experience and how do they see their national country when it comes to, you know, their action in race. I will start. Deny, deny, deny. That's it. For France, it's all about the deny. Yep. So.
Celine, I'm happy to go next. And I just very briefly wanted to just say, just going back to the last question, we should be careful not to make this just about the European institutions as well, because, you know, it's not just Brussels matters. Brussels is the capital of Europe. You know, it's the premium policy-making entity in this region and arguably in the world. And you only have to read Anna Bradford's book, The Brussels Effect, to really understand and appreciate how much power this city actually really wields. But we have a problem in the Commission, and yes, we have a problem in the Council, and yes, we have a problem in the Parliament, but we have 163 third country missions here. We have 3,000 NGOs here. We have 6,000 companies based here. We have 25,000 associations and consultants. Where's their commitments to diversity and inclusion? So we should be careful not to only laser focus in on the institutions, which absolutely they need to act, but others have a responsibility too, and they should be really actively thinking about what their responsibility looks like. I'll then segue into, I was born in the West Midlands in the United Kingdom, and my apologies for anyone. I'm obviously a pro-European. I believe in the European Union. I voted to stay in the EU, but a lot of my countrymen, women did not feel that way, and hopefully one day we will be having a conversation about rejoining, and I look forward to that. But I do feel that when I moved to Brussels, the conversations around was I a taxi driver that was here to pick someone up, or was I in the right place, particularly in the bubble, I found them much too more frequent than I've ever experienced in London or even in the West Midlands in the UK. So I do think the experiences in different member states are different for people of colour. And even though the UK has now left, and I think that's, for this particular conversation, I think that's very sad. I do think that my personal experience, my personal journey has been very different in Brussels, in the Brussels bubble, in comparison to my professional experiences in London and other parts of the UK.
I can come in, Celine. So I always say I'm an accidental European, arrived here by parental accident. My father was posted here, and I stayed. And I stayed because I absolutely fell in love with Europe. And a European, but that was another story. But it's the story of Europe that actually consumes me with inspiration and passion. I was born in a country, Pakistan, South Asia, very much involved in daily, let's say, animosities between South Asian countries, India, Pakistan. I lived through wars, very, very, very tragic wars, loss of life. And this story of Europe consumes me, as I said, because I think it really is a model of inspiration for other countries. And it really is, Gurpreet, as you said, in today's world. All these embassies and missions who are here are not just here because of trade. They're also learning about governance and, living together. So this is one story that's important. As a journalist, Celine, I was working for European papers, but also papers in Asia. And you were right, Gurpreet, the press room. I mean, yes, there are foreign journalists here, but European journalists of color who can bring another story, another dimension, are very rare. And I'm seeing that it's changing, and that really does encourage me. And my final point would be, we talked about intersectionality. For a long time, being different in Brussels meant you were a Muslim. We have to come out and say there is rampant Islamophobia, and my name stands out. It stands out, and I've had comments about my name, who I am, my identity. Am I really European? Where was I born? All those issues that a white person would not have to deal with. So let's be quite frank. Belgium is a wonderful country. I love being here, but there is Islamophobia, and I would say, in a sense, it's more than Black Lives Matter. It's also about Muslim Lives Matter. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I would like to make a reference to intersectionality, because when we look at different parts in Europe, we also have to look at the different parts of our communities. So who are the most marginalized ones? And of course, these are the ones without papers, the ones who are seeking asylum. And we do see that in all of Europe, but we also see that a lot in Eastern Europe. We do see that a lot at the border. So we're looking at Italy, we're looking at Spain, for example. And then not even talking about the newcomers coming to Europe, but also the populations which have been here for ages, especially the Sinti and Roma community. And here again, I'm looking towards Eastern Europe, but unfortunately, it's an issue in whole of Europe that these groups, even within COVID, has shown, were put literally into ghettos and not let out of these places because they were apparently the ones who brought COVID-19 into the different countries. So there is a yes to this question, but also a no, a general no, because discrimination and racism exists everywhere, no matter in which country. We do see differences within the communities and the identities, and even then within the different status. And of course, we also have to look at gender here. There is a different rate of police brutality when it comes to looking at men. There's a different case of vulnerability on the labor force when we look at women, for example. So there is definitely a difference here.
Thank you, Karen, so much. We have another question from Jamie Jess, Policy Advisor at Equality Diversity at CENR. So he said that monitoring is an interesting element, but outside of private sector, how can we get a grip and full view on the reality of structural racism and discrimination in Europe, especially when some countries forbid gathering data on ethnicity background? So France, we forbid data, and Belgium also. So I would maybe, Alice, yes, go ahead.
I think the question is an important question because it's a fact that we need more facts. Not because the facts will make the change. I mean, there are already a lot of facts, and still we have racism, structural racism and discrimination within the EU. But we need more facts, and we need to have them in different ways. I mean, we are talking about intersectionality. I mean, we need to talk about the discrimination within the discrimination, and we need more facts about the different forms of racism, Islamophobia, Afrophobia, and so on and so forth. And this was something I really took up with President von der Leyen, that we need knowledge, more facts and intersectionalism, and to talk to, I want her and other people with power, politicians like me, to say Islamophobia, say it. Don't, because now it's easy to talk about racism in a very broad way. Oh, it's racism in a vague way, but we need to talk about and specify them so we know what we are talking about, and so that people feel that we are seeing them and doing something. But we need more data. So we need to be creative to make sure that we have EU institutions or other organs, not at least NGOs, giving the power and the possibility to bring those data in accordance, of course, with national law. In Sweden, we have a very sad example from 2013, when it was thanks to journalism, we found out the public got aware that the police were having registers of Roma people, even children and even unborn children of their families, because of they were Roma and therefore suspicious due to this police force in the south of Sweden. And I think this is a huge problem, that we have a need for data and facts, and at the same time we have groups, of course, that, I mean, the Roma group and the representatives for the Roma group in Sweden, of course, very scared of having any data on who they are and why and so on. So we need to be creative, and we can't do that. We can't manage if we don't have a conversation with the Roma community, for example, in Sweden. So the NGOs are crucial to give us these facts and the data. Thank you.
Karen, would you like to come in?
Yeah, but I think Gurpreet wanted to come in as well, so I'm happy to wait. It's fine.
Okay, go ahead, Gurpreet.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the point around data. I think it's fundamental, Alice, and I love the way that you eloquently outlined that. You know, we need facts. It's as simple as that. But I also just wanted to give a different type of answer. Role models matter too. You know, and I think the people like us who actually are able to raise these points and raise these concerns and talk about representation need to not only sit in the seats in which we currently occupy, but we need to be sitting in many more seats and occupying many more seats in Brussels. And so we really need to do a better job of enthusing people from our own communities to take responsibility for the future that they want to see as well. It's not somebody else's responsibility to come up with the future for Europe. It's equally, if not more important, that we also take responsibility as well. And so, yes, data is one part of that jigsaw puzzle, but the more that people like us are sitting in the right seats, the more the next generation will stand up and feel that they can also be sitting in those seats and be representing the continent or the region as well. So I think the two things for me come together, data and the facts, but also the ownership by the community that we need to be part of the story we want to narrate, not kind of watching it as it trolls on alongside us without any active participation.
Thank you, Gurpreet. Karen?
Maybe linking also the ownership with this lack of data, what we do see in several countries, we've seen it in France with Le Grand, we do see it right now in Germany with my organization, IF2020, which is gathering these kind of data. Here we call it the Afro census for the Black communities here in Germany. We did take our faith, let's say, into our own hands to show the experiences Black people do in Germany, which definitely include racism and discrimination, but also what we contribute to this country. And I think this is always lacking in the discussion. We only focus on the negative points, and we don't turn towards the communities and see, well, they are beneficiaries, they are a part of taxpayers. We are lecturers in universities. During COVID, we talked about crucial infrastructure. So we are definitely part of this crucial infrastructure when it comes to hospitals, but also sitting in the supermarket and selling. So these basic examples will be highlighted within this census. And I believe this can be a go-to to go around the, I believe, very understandable fear of communities that these kind of data is gathered by the state or the state institutions. I absolutely understand the concerns here coming from Germany, but I do believe without these data, we won't get any farther within the discussion, because yes, I would say, Gurpreet, we do need to face and turn towards our our communities and the ones who are already in the spotlight. But I believe it's the door can only be opened by the majority. That's what I believe. Of course, we are pushing through, and of course, we are the ones fighting and screaming on the streets and everything. But at the end, unfortunately, it's up to the majority to say, yes, we believe that this is our issue too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna agree with you that we do need to have the majority, but I don't think like we should wait for them, because otherwise we'll wait forever. So let's go into the part where, because you already kind of, some of you like started talking about the concrete action. So you started about saying like data, like we need facts to face the facts. So what else can we do, can you do, or what else are you already doing personally or professionally to make sure that the change is happening? It doesn't have to be big, because I feel like sometimes we're looking for massive action, but I feel like, just like every love, it's a little bit of watering every day that makes it last, right? So what, Shada, what do you do personally and professionally to really push for this change?
Yeah, thank you. I'll answer that in a second, and it's very important, Celine. But I just wanted to say, data matters, facts matter, but narratives matter, stories matter. And I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, and for me, the story is really important. And I think, and this really behoves leadership as well, it's a question of leadership. We have to create, and we are in the process of creating, an inclusive story about Europe. The far right, the far right has hijacked the debate. And we've seen it over the Brexit, we've seen it in Hungary, we've seen it across in France, in Germany, AfD, Marine Le Pen, in the Netherlands. It's all about the far right having grabbed the entire story, and mainstream politicians, whether they're left or right, but I would say more to the right, are struggling. And because they're looking for votes and they think this is a vote puller, they are embracing a rhetoric of the far right. And I find this appalling. I've been saying it for years. We need to have a new story of Europe where politicians have the courage. And that's where the European Commission and European commissioners and the Parliament, the Council, can come in, and they can set and craft a narrative, a story of Europe, which is not about saving the European way of life, which is not about migrants are bad and we go and then say, we are the shield against these, these migrants coming in from the south, where we really are a more, not just a more humane and compassionate, but living up to our own values, which are in the treaties, which are our fundamental rights. And we're breaching them, Celine, on a daily basis. And this is not even sort of, we become so numb to this rhetoric, we become so used to it that we don't really react anymore. So for me, this us and them, this divisive Europe has to be replaced by a story which is an inclusive story, because that really is the story. Now, you were saying, what can we do? I think this action plan that the Commission is committed to coming up with, I think this is going to be an important first step, and we have to make sure that all the racialized groups, advisory groups, etc., are really brought into it, that there's proper funding, that there's proper consultation, not after the event, which sometimes, you talked about firefighting mode, comes in later, but actually part of the process. I think this is going to be very important. And then two things coming up: the Conference on the Future of Europe, Alice. I mean, this is going to be an important, gathering of people. Let's have minority voices heard there. And the new recovery fund, the Next Generation EU fund. Let's make sure that, communities that have really suffered because of COVID-19, and we've seen that they've been essential workers as well, so dying as well, trying to save others, and they should have, I think, access to this as well. And finally, yes, majority has to come along, because without that, we will not get things done. But our voices cannot just be kept quiet. I think we found a voice through a very tragic accident, and it would be important that the pressure, the momentum is kept up by all of us, but also our friends outside.
Thank you, Shada. Gurpreet?
Yeah, sure. I could not agree more that stories matter and narratives matter. I work in communications, and I am always slightly frustrated by the story and narrative of minority communities being always told as being the people that come here to expunge off the continent. Actually tell the story of entrepreneurial spirit from our communities, tell the story of our innovation, tell the story of our educational qualifications. Stop telling the story of migration, but in a singular. That really does frustrate me, because it always presents us as the other rather than the in. And so, Shada, I completely agree with you. And stories matter on a personal level as well. So the question is, what can we do, and what can we do to kind of almost keep the flowers growing on a daily basis in some way or form? I am always, and I'm very fortunate to always be 100% of myself. Look, I grew up to Indian parents in the West Midlands who came from India under challenging circumstances. I came out as being gay at the age of 30. It was very challenging. My family is very, very traditional and very religious, but I've always never shied away from telling that story. Today, I'm married to an Eastern European, a Polish Catholic, and that story tells the story of Europe. That is the quintessential story of Europe. My husband is white, I am brown, but that does not matter. And we live between London and Brussels. That's my story, and stories do matter. And people need to be brave enough to have these type of conversations and tell those stories every single day. Because from that, we get the education and we get the points around, let me ask you some questions. And I have had many questions, from what kind of films did you watch at home? Well, I watched a lot of Bollywood films, to what kind of books do you read? Well, actually, I read a lot of historical books around colonialism. So let me share some of those with you. To what kind of podcasts do you listen to, or what news channel is your go-to? Well, actually, Al Jazeera is one of my go-to news channels, primarily because they have a fantastic program called Studio B, which is all about unscripted conversations about diversity. So let's have this educational informality. Let's speak to people about that, and let's ask ignorant questions. Ask me the stupid question that you're afraid to ask, because it's my responsibility to make you feel comfortable about asking that. But then there are some very specific things that employers can do. They can provide training around unconscious bias. Every employer in Belgium or across the region should be doing that. We all have some degree of unconscious bias. There's a simple step, we can provide that. We've also committed at Edelman that we now have regional diversity and inclusion committees, and then we have race advisory forums. Those groups are responsible for coming up with strategy, they're responsible for coming up with policy, and they're responsible for driving action and change. And so we have very clear commitments at a business level to say a certain percentage of our workforce needs to be D&I compliant, and then we set targets against that. We also have very clear supply chain agreements now, where we say actually a certain percentage of our supply chain work needs to be coming from a certain type of background of supplier, and we have commitments around that. So you can get very specific and drive the change that you want to be, but you have to invest in it, and you have to spend the time to think about it in the holistic rather than in the narrow. And so my plea to people is, what can you do? You can do a lot, but if you start one thing today, please watch something that you're not comfortable with about a different community. And my recommendation would be watch RuPaul's Drag Race. It would completely change the way that you think about the gay community or the drag community, and also the challenges that they face. Because did you know that most of those drag queens can probably do better makeup than most of the people sat on this panel? So let's bring down these barriers in a simple way. Watch TV programs and things that you don't necessarily feel comfortable with.
Alice, before you go in, I would like to ask a question, bring in the question from Mehdi El Garni, which Gurpreet somehow touched upon when in his response. So first of all, he said, thank you for this insightful presentation. So we're doing such a great job, guys. Keep it up. You talked about missing skill to foster diversity, and we, as in Belgium, face a big problem in skills gap, whilst an employment access gap is going wider for people of diversity compared to Belgians. How can company engage effort to involve talent with immigration background and address the two issues mentioned above? Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you for the question. And I think, to answer the question in short, I think it's important that we get this narrative, this story also going within the Belgium, in this case, media. Because in Sweden, for example, there have been, some years ago, a big discussion about competences and about the responsibility that companies have towards the stock owners to make sure that they do their best, and therefore they need competences, different competences, as said before within this panel. So I think this is important, that we talk to journalists about this, that we write to own letters to be published in the media about this, and that we have panels about this, about the lack of competences and how many people who don't even get the chance to be part of the competition to get their work. So that was a very short answer. But then to what to do. I was so inspired by your story, Gurpreet. I mean, what a fantastic with your Polish husband and everything, and the RuPaul's Drag Race. I watch it a lot. It hasn't helped so much, but anyway. But I think you are totally right in what to do, because there are, of course, a lot of things. I mean, I think I should answer in this way, because there are so many things we can do from the different platforms that we have. But I think one of the most important things is that we keep these conversations going. Because just as Shada said early on, I was afraid that after this summer, people will have kept on going, and we have forgot about George Floyd and all the other killings, and everything would be, an undone job. But so we need to have this conversation going on. We need to remind ourselves to be angry, and we need to make sure that people who are not listening are blamed and shamed. And, we need to scream, because we have platforms, we have responsibilities, we have power. So let's use it, and let's find what we can have common grounds on, and be a force with an end that really hurts and sticks in those people who want to be back to normal and do business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. Karen, I have a great question for you. So it's Teresa Dominguez who says, thank you for a very interesting panel. Oh my God, love it. My question is, what measure could be applied to tackle structural racism in the short term? What's first? And what can the normal person without political power do to contribute to improve conditions in the bubble for being right now? So I would like each of you guys after Karen to really respond to this, because I think this is very, very important.
So I'm going to be really quick. ENAR has developed actually a roadmap for EU institutions to address institutional and structural racism. So I believe there are two sides to this answer. On the one hand, what can the Brussels bubble do? If few key points would, and we've talked about it, understanding how structural racism works. That implies having the sort of data. It implies mentioning the historical dimensions of this issue, but it also implies talking about the perpetrators, so to say. And here, one of the key issues for ENAR is police violence that we don't talk enough about in Brussels. It also means, and Shada has also touched upon that, racial, that we know gender mainstreaming of policies. We also need racial equality mainstreaming in all policies, and not only the ones that tackle racism on the first sight, but throughout the whole policy area, be it the Pact on Migration, the Europe Digital Future, and so on. And what national contexts can do is to come up with national action plans against racism, which are binding and which also include a monitoring of the situation and also penalties for the ones who who infiltrate racism within our community. So that would be on the policy side. On the private side, what can every individual do? Educate yourself. It's not in my responsibility to tell you about what is going on in Europe, because you can read about it, you can listen to podcasts, you can watch it on YouTube. So there are lots of media possibilities for yourself to educate yourself. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, when people of our communities are talking, please do listen. Don't just come up with your own bias, with your own uncomfortable insecurities and your personal barriers when we do also address people that have been were racist. Just listen, take a step back, maybe go back home, talk to your private people about what has been said or what happened, reflect on it, and then come up with that answer. Don't be responsive at the first sight. And then the last thing is, if you have gone this journey and you are at the moment in the position to actually see racism, then do address it. If it happens on the street, when it happens within your family structures, do say something, because of course that person of color, that Black person, will say something or will be touched by it, but it's so much easier for a white person to speak out and to act upon it.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so you guys, I need you to do something very good for me. You're gonna have, we are almost out of time, but we can do this. So Shada, Gurpreet, Elise, and Karen, for the end, I need you, Shada, Gurpreet, and Elise, to do me one solid. So give me one measure to tackle structural racism, one thing that an individual can do, and one commitment that you will be taking up, and that I will be obviously checking on in the next, by the end of the year, to make sure that you guys keep up with your commitment. So who is ready to go? Go ahead, Shada.
Okay, so I want to say one thing that we haven't talked about, and it's controversial, but I think we need to put it out there. Affirmative action. Affirmative action, I think, is something we don't talk about. We're a little uncomfortable and easy with it, special status, blah, blah. But we did it for women, and I'm very happy about that, being a woman myself. And we can do it. So I would say, let's really take the bull by the horns and try something new. And, the action plan, all of that is wonderful. Thank you. But let's be more daring. What I would do on my own level is, whenever I can, when I was in a position where I was hiring people, I went out of my way to play that affirmative action role and to give, I'm sorry to say, priority, equal qualifications. I was willing and ready to look at a person of color and recruit that. Now I'm not hiring myself. My company isn't that big just yet, but that will be a commitment. And another, and call out racism always. And I will not stop saying uncomfortable truths to politicians in my articles, in my podcasts, my videos. When something hurts me, when I think something's wrong, I speak truth to power, and I'm not going to stop doing that. So you can hold me accountable for that. Speaking truth to power, even when you're the only voice, I think that requires a little bit of, I have to say, cheekiness and being out there ready to do it, but I'm going to be doing it. I will, I hope.
Thank you, Shada. Gurpreet?
Yeah, so I'm going to add something slightly tweaked into the conversation as well. The measure, I'm looking forward to not necessarily my individual, but the commission actually having a commissioner that looks like one of the people on this panel. That's what I'm really looking forward to. So I'm going to use that as my measuring stick to really define that that Europe is really moving in the right direction, because until that glass ceiling is broken, for me, we're still too far apart on where we need to be on representation in this particular region. Success, Karen, I could not agree with you more. Call it out, call it out, call it out. It's not my job to only feel uncomfortable when somebody calls me a poppadom in a meeting. You should be outraged too. And so if that happens, call it out, call it out, call it out. You should feel like it's your job just as much as anybody else. My personal commitment has always been to mentoring and coaching. If I want more people to be sat in the type of seats that we're all sat in, it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm available. So anyone listening into this panel, my LinkedIn is a very open space. If you want to have a 30-minute conversation with me, I will make sure I'm available. But I also do that for anyone that ever contacts me. So that 30 minutes of free advice and guidance of how you could equally be sat in these type of seats, that's my commitment, and that will continue to be my commitment, as well as driving change within my organization, Edelman.
Thank you. Alice?
Thank you, and you are so inspiring. I mean, I think what really is needed to be changed on an institutional level, and that I will work with, is the anti-discrimination directive that has been blocked for 10 years in council. It will be tough, but I will make a fight about it and make it shown. I will shame and blame and have so many meetings that I can. I will be a pain in the ass, to be very, very upfront. And I will also continue to create bad environments, because that is what you do when you are uncomfortable. Saying, what did you just say, even to people with more power than me? I mean, I already have a problem sign in my head, so it won't go away. And I have lived a long part of my life, so I can keep on going being the problem lady, the one who, should we really invite her? Yes, no, yes, you should. But I will keep on being that one. And what everyone can do, I think that everyone listening to this can decide for themselves who they want to be. Do they want to be a person that lived their life during this time of the human life and did something that was bigger than themselves, or do they not want to be that kind of person? Decide. And if you decide that you want to be part of the change, then we have a long list. All the NGOs have a long list on what to do. So decide for yourself, who do you want to be? Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And Karen, could you tell us your commitment?
My commitment, and that's something I've been doing for so long, is to empower our communities. Because I believe without that, we will not reach this critical mass that can actually drive change. So for me, empowerment is the key.
Thank you. And my commitment, because I know you all care about it, it's literally continuing being a pain in the ass, as Alice is a pain in the ass. Telling it how it is, and also continuing to have Ma Vie Citoyenne Europe, a web TV who talks about EU, and bringing MEPs of color. Sorry, there's only MEP of color that comes into my show. Unless you're commissioners, because as Gurpreet said, we're still missing some color, but 4 more years to go, right? So anyway, I want to thank you all for watching and joining us today. It was amazing. Like, you guys, the panelists, Shada, Gurpreet, Alice, and thank you so much. You made my job so much easier. I will also want to thank Luisa Frumenzi and Mark Wilson, co-founder of One Policy Place, for not only letting me moderate this panel, but also really letting me do what I want to do and taking in my advice and to creating the first ever Idea Festival and trying to make sure that everyone is represented in all the panels. So yes, here we talked about specifically diversity, but I want to remind you, people of color, we are smart. We've got engineers, we've got doctors, we've got informatician, we've got scientists. So when you have a panel that talks about climate, that talks about financial trade, or any energy, or any sort of panel, agriculture, we've got it. If you can't find it, let me know. I will find you that expertise, because we are here. So then your panel will be a bit more diverse, and then you will also have a bit more enriched conversation. So this was us. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for watching, and lots of love. See you soon.